Rachel and Marcus Turner seemed like ordinary parents until a single flicker of light behind a locked storage door revealed the 6 children they had hidden from the world. The industrial outskirts of Willow Creek were usually silent after dark, a stretch of cracked pavement and corrugated metal warehouses that most people passed without a second glance. On a damp October night, the air hung heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt as a lone security guard made his routine rounds through the dimly lit storage complex. He had walked this path countless times, but something about the evening felt different, as though the shadows were holding their breath. The narrow lanes between rows of metal units seemed darker than usual, the weak glow of overhead lamps barely reaching the ground. When he approached the end of the third row, a flicker of light caught his eye. It was faint and intermittent, like the dying flash of a candle. He paused, unsure if it was a trick of his tired eyes, and stepped closer. The light came from behind a roll-down door marked with a fading number, 47. The padlock on the latch was odd new and polished against the rusting metal. As the guard reached for it, he felt a faint warmth, as though it had been touched moments earlier. A quiet scrape echoed from inside, a sound too deliberate to be a mouse or the groan of shifting boxes. He held his breath, listening again, and heard a soft rustle, almost like someone adjusting a blanket. His heartbeat quickened. This was supposed to be an empty unit. The last rental record for Unit 47 was weeks old, signed under a name that the office manager had mentioned only once in passing. Uneasy but professional, he took a step back and shone his flashlight along the seams of the door. A thin wisp of condensation curled out from a small gap near the floor, carrying a musty odor that reminded him of damp basements and forgotten laundry. He knocked twice, firm but cautious. No response came, only a brief shuffle, then silence. The guard's radio crackled as he called in the strange activity, his voice steadier than he felt. Protocol was clear, no attempt to open a unit without police present. Still, the urge to act gnawed at him. As he waited for the authorities, the night seemed to stretch. The wind rattled loose sheet metal, and the drizzle thickened into a slow, cold rain. Behind the metal door, the unseen presence remained perfectly still. The guard could not know that this quiet corner of the city, where nothing ever seemed to happen, was about to become the center of a story that would rattle the entire community and reveal a darkness far beyond a simple trespass. The police cars arrived just before the first light of morning, their red and blue flashes cutting through the drizzle that had settled over the storage lot. Officers stepped out, boots splashing in shallow puddles, and quickly surrounded Unit 47. The security guard stood nearby, arms folded tightly across his chest as he replayed the strange noises in his mind. One officer inspected the gleaming padlock, noting how new it looked compared to the weathered metal door. With a quick exchange of glances, they clipped the lock and pulled the heavy roll-up door upward. A groan of rusted hinges filled the damp air, followed by a smell so foul and stagnant it made one officer cough. Their flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing a scene none of them expected. The beams swept over concrete walls coated with grime and mildew. Piles of stained blankets were heaped in corners, their colors dulled by layers of dust. The floor was scattered with crumpled food wrappers, plastic bottles half filled with cloudy water, and broken toys lying like forgotten relics. Near the far wall, movement caught an officer's eye. 6 small shapes huddled together, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. At first, the officers thought they were looking at mannequins or piles of clothing, but as the light steadied, the figures shifted. Children. They ranged from a toddler barely able to stand to a teenager with wide, watchful eyes. Their faces were pale, their hair matted and tangled. None of them spoke or cried out. They simply stared at the sudden brightness, their pupils shrinking as if they hadn't seen daylight in weeks. One boy clutched a dented tin cup, another wrapped himself in a torn curtain like a shield. The youngest girl clung to the oldest's arm, trembling but silent. The officers exchanged quick, alarmed looks, but kept their voices low, careful not to frighten them further. As they moved closer, the details became more unsettling. The unit contained no furniture, only cardboard flattened to soften the hard floor. Empty cans and a single rusted heater sat in a corner, wires frayed and useless. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the unmistakable scent of unwashed clothes and stale food. A clipboard found near the entrance held no identifying information, just smudged scribbles and a date from months ago. Paramedics were called immediately. One officer gently guided the children toward the open door, speaking softly even as the oldest hesitated, scanning the night beyond like it was an unknown world. Outside, the drizzle felt sharp and cold, but it was the first fresh air they had breathed in who knew how long. The officers knew this was only the beginning of a larger, more disturbing mystery. Detectives arrived at the storage complex within the hour, quickly sealing off the area as forensic teams began their careful work. While paramedics tended to the children, investigators sifted through the clutter inside Unit 47, photographing every detail. The discovery of 6 siblings living in such conditions raised urgent questions. Who had left them there? And why had no one reported them missing? There were no birth certificates, no school papers, not even a scrap of mail with a real name. A single prepaid cell phone lay beneath a blanket, its battery drained and its memory wiped clean. The only hint of a trail was a receipt tucked inside a food wrapper dated 3 days earlier from a gas station nearly 50 miles away. Detective Lena Ortiz traced that receipt, contacting the station's night clerk. Security footage revealed a couple purchasing canned goods and bottled water late at night. Their faces were partially hidden by hooded jackets, but their body language was unmistakable, protective, hurried, almost furtive. Using traffic cameras, the team followed the route of the vehicle described in the footage, a faded green minivan with no visible license plates. The trail wove through back roads and small towns, each camera capturing a fleeting glimpse before the couple seemed to vanish again. Meanwhile, social services began piecing together the children's fragmented accounts. Though reluctant to speak, the oldest eventually whispered that their parents had told them to stay quiet until we come back. She could not say when that would be. Medical evaluations suggested they had been living in the unit for weeks, surviving on small amounts of packaged food and water. None of the children were registered in local schools or health records, indicating a long pattern of living off the grid. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered a string of false identities linked to the same 2 adults. Rental agreements across several counties displayed different names but the same handwriting style. Credit card statements showed small withdrawals from distant ATMs, each transaction, further evidence of a nomadic existence. Former neighbors from a distant suburb remembered a family matching the children's description who had abruptly moved out 6 months earlier after repeated visits from debt collectors. Each clue added to a growing picture of deliberate evasion. By the 3rd day, the case had shifted from a local welfare concern to a multi-state manhunt. Detectives suspected the parents were skilled at disappearing, changing towns before suspicion caught up. Yet the question lingered like a storm cloud over every lead. What could drive a mother and father to hide their children in a cold storage unit and vanish without a trace? As investigators dug into old records and financial histories, a complex portrait of Rachel and Marcus Turner began to emerge. Years earlier, they had been the owners of a small but thriving home renovation business, known in their community for meticulous work and friendly service. Tax filings showed steady income until 2 years ago, when a sudden downturn appeared. Bank statements revealed a series of risky investments in unproven real estate schemes, each more desperate than the last. When the ventures collapsed, lawsuits and creditors followed. Within months, foreclosure notices piled up, and court summonses threatened to strip them of nearly everything they owned. Friends recalled that the couple, once sociable and generous, began withdrawing from neighbors and relatives. Phone numbers were disconnected, emails went unanswered, and their once busy workshop stood empty. Detectives reviewing custody documents discovered that Child Protective Services had opened an investigation around the same time. A neighbor had reported erratic behavior, and a social worker attempted several visits before the family disappeared. Notes from those visits described Rachel as anxious and suspicious, convinced that outsiders wanted to separate her from her children. Marcus, according to one report, spoke of a need to keep the family together no matter what it takes. These early warnings hinted at a fear that had grown unchecked. Further interviews with distant acquaintances painted a troubling picture of escalating paranoia. A former business partner recounted receiving late-night calls in which Marcus ranted about hidden government plots and financial conspiracies. Another acquaintance said Rachel believed that officials were using court proceedings as a pretext to remove the children permanently. Rather than seeking help, the couple began moving from one rental house to another, each stay shorter than the last. They sold tools, furniture, and finally their remaining vehicle, purchasing an old green minivan with cash, an ideal escape vehicle with no paper trail. The pattern showed a steady slide from financial ruin to isolation. The Turners avoided hospitals, schools, and workplaces, leaving no medical records or employment files to trace. They lived in motels, then campgrounds, eventually renting storage units under false names when money grew scarce. Investigators concluded that the storage unit in Willow Creek was not an impulsive hiding place, but part of a larger plan: stay invisible, keep the children near, and wait for a chance to rebuild without interference. What they never accounted for was how quickly a single, overlooked detail, a flicker of light behind a locked door, could unravel months of careful secrecy. 2 days after the discovery at the storage unit, a tip from a rural motel clerk finally broke the case open. The clerk had recognized the family from news broadcasts and reported a green minivan parked at the edge of the gravel lot, its rear windows covered with cardboard. Local deputies arrived quietly before dawn, parking out of sight while state investigators set up a perimeter. The early morning fog hung thick over the roadside pines as officers approached the room registered under yet another false name. Through the thin curtains, they spotted movement: 2 adults pacing in the glow of a single lamp, bags stacked neatly by the door as if ready for a sudden departure. When the knock came, there was no attempt to run. Rachel opened the door first, eyes red-rimmed and tired, while Marcus stood a step behind her, hands raised before a word was spoken. The arrest was calm, but heavy with the weight of what they had done. Officers found the minivan packed with canned food, water jugs, and blankets, along with notebooks filled with coded financial notes and fragments of plans to reach an unnamed safe place. The children's clothing was folded in small bundles, as though the couple had truly believed they would reunite soon. Back in Willow Creek, the siblings were placed with foster families and given medical care. Doctors reported signs of malnutrition but were optimistic about recovery. Social workers described the children as quiet but observant, slowly warming to gentle conversation. The oldest girl, once withdrawn, began to speak about small memories of normal life: school playgrounds, birthday cakes, offering glimpses of a childhood interrupted but not entirely lost. Support groups and counselors worked to provide stability, determined to keep the siblings connected despite temporary separation into different homes. The legal process moved swiftly. Rachel and Marcus faced multiple charges: child endangerment, fraud, and unlawful confinement. During hearings, prosecutors outlined a pattern of calculated evasion, while defense attorneys spoke of fear, debt, and desperation. Public reaction was fierce and divided. Some saw the couple as reckless criminals, others as parents broken by financial ruin and misguided love. News outlets replayed images of Unit 47E's dim interior, turning the story into a nationwide debate about mental health, poverty, and the limits of parental protection. Months later, the storage facility replaced the rusted door and re-rented the space, but locals still avoided that row after dark. For many in Willow Creek, the quiet unit remained a haunting reminder of how ordinary lives can twist into secrecy and danger, and how a single chance discovery can bring even the most hidden truths into the open.